Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to the online user group for Europe and the Middle East and Africa. My name is Richard Taylor with Ideate Software, and I'd like to introduce Glynis Patterson, our Director of Software Development.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Looking forward to not just talking, but to hearing from all of you about your warnings challenges. Thanks,
Yeah,
Richard.
we've got a number of polls and places where we're going to be interactive and ask you questions. So again, be sure to find that question panel. So our overview today for this online user group, as we said, we'd like it to be very interactive. So we're going to ask you a number of questions along the way, and we've got some polls. But really, the focus here is on Revit warnings. You know, love them, hate them. I think you should fix them. We'll be talking about that. But which Revit warnings are the most important and which can potentially be ignored? And we all have models that have a number of warnings, and it's really important. And we're going to talk about that, why it's so important to fix those warnings. And so we've got some questions or some polls we're going to be asking, really, who should be fixing those warnings and how can you fix the warnings? And we're going to be talking about some new solutions from Ideate Software. Many of you may be familiar with our Ideate Explorer and our Ideate Warnings Manager. We're going to be talking about that today. But you may not be familiar with some of our newer Ideate automation with our warnings dashboard. So Glynis is going to give you a nice overview on that at the sort of the tail end of the presentation here. So starting us right off. Oh, and thank you for the hi, Richard. I appreciate that. So our first poll, Glynis, if you could launch the poll and just ask people where they are located. We'll
Okay.
give you a few minutes to answer that.
And I didn't tell you, Richard, but I changed our options. I thought that knowing which country
Oh,
people were in was just not that interesting. So I think this is a better question for all of us. And I'm really hoping that maybe some people are doing something than other working from their home. I should
well,
have put pub actually, right? Working in a
yeah.
coffee shop. It's not too late for
Well, I
that.
did notice we had some presentations yesterday. Nick Johns is also on the call, who is the sales associate for Ideate Software for the EMEA territory. And I know we had some presentations earlier in this week, and we saw some people that were in the office. So I know some people are working.
Yep. Looks like we've got a good percentage of you voting. Thanks for that so much. Go ahead and close. And I really go ahead and share the results there.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
So it's about 50-50. That is really interesting, whether people are working from home or working in an office. No one is working in a coffee shop today.
I should have written tea shop. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I actually find that like working in a coffee shop or any kind of restaurant is sort of distracting. There's just too much going on unless you have one of those separate cubicles where I know a number of places, at least here, have that where it's a coffee shop, but they actually have the individual kind of telephone booths where you can go in and have like a private conversation. But well, that's great. Thank you so much. Let's see. Okay, well here our focus today is really about Revit warnings. And so, what is a Revit warning? Well, warnings occur when there is a particular issue or problem within Revit, right? Like in this case, there are identical instances, or maybe a line is slightly off axis. We've all seen that, or a room tag outside of its, the room space. All kinds of situations, right? And so these can start to aggregate, and as you design and develop your Revit model, they can start to kind of become quite overwhelming. And there is a method within Revit, sort of built in, to address these warnings called the Autodesk Revit Warnings Manager. And this particular dialog really hasn't changed in quite a few years. In fact, if you're using Revit 2022, the latest release, they just made it resizable. So that's actually a nice feature, but it took them that long to actually make the dialog resizable. And so it's kind of clunky. It's sort of hard to understand or identify the elements that may contain the warning, and it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility when actually trying to fix those warnings. There are some things like you can move the room tags into the room center, or you can delete elements, but really to actually interact with the element or fix the Revit warning, you have to close this dialog, do the thing that you need to do, and then open up the dialog again and make sure that that was properly fixed. So I'll just say it's not the greatest user experience. So, we heard a lot about this a number of years ago, right? Before we developed our warnings manager. And we heard a lot of our customers, complaining about warnings. Whoops, I kind of went on to the next slide there. Complaining about Revit warnings. And we decided to do some research. So we went in and did some research about, well, are these warnings, important, and what are the consequences of them? For instance, and I think this is set for automatically going to the next slide, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit that for a second. The poor model performance, slow synchronization times, incorrect schedule data, model inaccuracy, model upgrade issues, even potentially file corruption issues. These are what we heard from our 2017 Ideate customer survey. So these are really, important and critical issues. And then we also did some research about, looking at what other people had written about warnings. So this came from the RTC, the Revit Technology Conference, back in 2015, where someone went through and basically tried to sort of validate some of the myths. And one of the myths that was out there was that too many Revit warnings make a model very slow. And so they did some research, they compiled the data, and in fact, this was a myth that was confirmed. And in fact, we hear this from our customers even today, that the number of Revit warnings is the most critical factor in slow model performance. So in this particular case, you've got a model with 245 warnings compared to a model with only 15 warnings, and the different tasks and the opening times. So, even though this was back in 2015, 6 years later here in 2021, this is still a very critical issue. And like I said, from all of our customers, we hear this is the most critical issue, is the number of warnings within the Revit model that can definitely impact performance times. So what we're going to do now is I'd like to switch over to Glynis. And before we kind of talk about our Revit warnings manager within Ideate Explorer, right, and some of the ways that we can identify and rank warnings, but also fix those warnings, we thought we'd like to give you a little preview of the latest Ideate Explorer and some of the new features that we've added specifically around Revit warnings. So Glynis, would you like to take it away?
I would. Thanks, Richard. Real quick, we've made some changes, as Richard said, related to warnings. And I just wanted to make sure for those of you who are using Ideate Explorer that you're aware of those recent changes. These changes were made in September, and the place that you can see most of the changes is here within our managed dialog box. I'll just go over both of these settings real quick. Up here in the cog, what you can do is control where the warnings settings are coming from. So for those of you who are using this, you may already be familiar that there's one called default, for example, and there's actually a couple other ones that ship with the product. There's one called custom, and you can see it's actually a larger file size. The default one is smaller because it only really shows like 58 warnings. This shows all sort of 1,000 warnings. So if you ever want to look at them, you can, this is where you would pull those into the project to manage them. That's not new, but what is new when you're looking at your settings, and actually, I'm going to go ahead. This is looking at the default warnings XML file. So that's the one that most of you might be familiar with. What's new here is simply that we've added this other piece of metadata called the warnings category. Actually, Richard brought it to our attention in reviewing all the warnings information, that there was this other way in which Autodesk was categorizing warnings, and we felt that would be useful. So the type information, which is really the description, and this is localized. So for those of you calling in from other countries today, if you're using French Revit, German Revit, you will see these, the type written in that language as well. That's coming from Autodesk. But you can now also sort of sort and look at these other examples. So, one of the things that I like to do with this new feature is, like, if I type the word overlap, for example, here's some of the overlap failures. This text search actually goes into the descriptor here, so it's for your language. But you can see when I find this warning, it is part of the warning category called overlap failures. So, if I wanted to sort, as I've done here, by that failure type, you could see all of them here. And so you could say, hey, anything that is an overlap failure, to me, that's really important. That goes to constructability and accuracy and quantities, and maybe I want all of those to be ranked as a high ranking. So this warning category is new. I'll go ahead and save that in my project. And then the other thing that's new is when you're here in the warnings tab, we've always had this sort of export list here, but there's a couple things that are changed in here. First is that you are getting this new category. The second is that we have rearranged how we're displaying the data in the elements columns over here. We have the ID first. That was really to help process the dashboards. So those are two sort of specific warnings, things that would apply to anybody. And then additionally, what we've done is we've enabled Explorer to work with our automation tool. And what I'm going to do is just close that, because I always need to remember that when I'm running automation, which is right over here, that I want to make sure I don't have Revit running in the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this back over to Richard in a second, but I'm going to bring up automation task and show you what's new if you're using automation. This Explorer script here, this health check script here, and this health check script here are all new, and they all interoperate with Explorer. So the way that this is designed to work, for example, is I can pick multiple files across multiple versions. This is, in this example, we're just looking at various BIM 360 projects. So let me go ahead and pick a couple other ones here. So I'll pick, let's see, I'll pick this architecture one. I'm just going to try to pick one from each version. Let's see, I'll pick this community center here, and then maybe one from 2022 also down in here, and I'll pick this MEP one here. So I've got 4 different files, 4 different versions. I'm going to use this template. This actually ships with the new version of Explorer. It's a health check template that's actually designed to work with both BIMlink and Ideate Explorer. So we'll see that towards the end of the presentation. And then I'm going to put my results as I'm exporting in this folder. And you can see the folder is empty. It's over here on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. It's going to be while we're talking. It's going to be running in the background. You can see it just launched 2019 there. And it's already started kind of its work here, where it's copying that template and putting it here and giving it a name. And we'll take a look at that at the end. So those are the big changes. They're all relating to warnings. And I want to turn it back over to you, Richard. Now let's talk a little bit about which warnings matter to people.
Okay, excellent. Let me go ahead and make myself a presenter. And there we go. Yeah, and it's I know you had mentioned the September updates, but it is available on our website right now. So if you are an Ideate Explorer customer, you want to make sure that you go to our website and install the latest. we've got some action items for you at the end to remind you to do that as well. So we've realized that, through all of our research back a few years ago, and just from hearing from thousands of customers, right, that warnings are really important. Okay, so now what? What do we do with this? Or how do we go about classifying or understanding and actually fixing these warnings, right? So you saw that Glennis just showed you the fact that there's this new warnings category or classification, right? That you can basically decide what is your critical warning. So we have given you basically three rankings, a high, which is a red color, a medium, and a low, which is green, and you can actually hide warnings as well. And, and so you may say, well, how did you go about determining which are high ranked, which are medium, and which are low? Well, it's a little bit of a, I would say, not an exact process when it comes to what is the most critical warning, because it really depends on your particular model and maybe your particular workflow. And a few years ago, when I was creating a presentation for the Built conference, which was previously the RTC, I was talking about warnings. And I went to Autodesk, and since I had some connections there, and I said, "Can you tell me, what are the most critical warnings, and where should people or customers be focusing their attention?" And in fact, I didn't get an exact answer, because I guess the situation is, it's not the same for everyone. So, certainly the geometrical warnings, the overlapping warnings are something that is a critical factor. But there are other issues that come into play as well. So really, we've given you the control to be able to set this up and rank based on your particular workflow and your models. So I'll call it's not an exact science. It's something that we've taken a very good pass at creating a series of rankings. And what we've done I think there's about 60 or so, Glennis, that in our sample file that we deliver with Ideate Explorer, we've ranked those warnings. But in fact, there are actually over 900 warnings that are defined within Revit. So there is a large contingency that we haven't actually placed a ranking to. So we thought we should ask you. And so, Glennis, if you could maybe launch poll number one, and talking about these warnings. We want to hear from you, from everyone on the call. Who should be reviewing the Revit warnings? And I hope the first one isn't selected, but we'll give you a couple minutes to review that. We've got about 20% of the people that have voted.
I remember when we asked this same exact question when we were developing the Warnings Manager tool within Explorer. We queried all of our beta testers, and this was a really interesting question. We got some great feedback about how people were trying to tackle this.
And we're getting up there to maybe it's about a little over 80% will show. And so far, the results I'm not surprised at.
Yeah, go ahead and share that.
So this is exactly the results that we received about, 4 years ago or so, Glennis, when we were working on the Warnings Manager, maybe 5 years at this point.
Yeah, it actually it looks fairly similar. Yep.
So, really, the consensus is that everyone working on a Revit project should really review those warnings, right? And sometimes I think the second largest is a select group of people. There sometimes tends to be, whether it's a BIM manager or maybe a project coordinator or project manager that's assigned to that. That also is something that I've seen sort of typical. So we've now had the consensus that everyone should be reviewing these warnings, right, on a daily basis, or certainly it would be best on a daily basis, but let's say even a weekly basis. But then comes poll number two: whose responsibility is it to fix those warnings? And this will be interesting to see. So the first one, you kind of identified a problem, you reviewed it. The second one is, okay, now that we understand there's a problem, whose responsibility?
We should have added like a anyone but me option, I think.
Yeah. Well, and we're up almost 90%. Now,
I
this is
think,
actually, the results are kind of interesting that I see so far that I'll talk about in a second, whenever you want to show that, Glynis.
sure. Yep. Go ahead and close that and share it back.
Well, and this is actually flipped a little bit because when we did our research, I believe, Glynis, wasn't everyone the highest number, if I
No,
remember
no,
correctly?
not for fixing. No, this is
Oh,
actually in alignment with that. Yeah, I think the
okay.
idea is everybody should be contributing to sort of finding them or um, reviewing them. Everybody should be reviewing them, but not necessarily everybody should be fixing them.
Okay. Well, then it is, it's somewhat split in the sense that, yes, a select group of people, again, maybe those BIM managers, those project coordinators, those project managers, have the responsibility, or team leaders have the responsibility to fix those warnings. But also, I do think that there's a large contingent, you think about that 44%, that it really should be everyone's responsibility to review and fix those warnings. So thanks, Glennis.
Yeah, yeah, Richard, I think one thing we wanted to also make sure we were doing a little bit here is actually asking people, I think back to your previous slide, just opening up the question panel specifically to hearing from everybody about which warnings actually are the ones that, is there one warning that you really are trying to squash? And if anybody could just maybe contribute to a little discussion in the question panel, that would be great. Or if you want to raise your hand and speak, that would be nice as well. It's
Yeah, thank you.
definitely, yeah, go ahead.
I was say thank you for that, Glennis. I was thinking it was the next slide after this, but you're right. It was the previous slide where we were talking about the asking people what is their most critical warning. So
Right.
thanks
And I know
for
that when I don't see anybody typing in yet, which is fine, but like when we were previously reviewing this question, this was a really important question during our beta program. We were trying to understand, were there themes about the ones that people were really felt were important or were dedicated to squashing. We were working with customers who had like a zero tolerance for all warnings. That's pretty rare, actually, of course. Oh, great, Andreas, thanks for your contribution. Yeah, Andreas is mentioning that, and Andreas, do you want to unmute yourself or can he do that? Richard, can he unmute himself?
I'm going to go ahead and actually make that available. So
Okay.
yes, he can.
Andreas, do you want to just mention what it is that you're doing?
Oh, okay. That's fine. He's saying there's a lot of background noise.
Got
He's
it. No
probably in the
worries.
office.
No worries. Yeah. So Andreas just mentioning that he's trying to fix any warnings that are room related. And I think that's definitely a theme that we heard from a lot of our customers. James Gray, we're trying to address any warnings that Revit is running calculations from, right? Which would include room areas along with duplicate elements. Again, great theme. And that's a example, James, and everybody, about where in the dialogue that Richard's showing, you can search for the word calculation and you can find those particular ones really easily and rank them as high ranked warnings so that they kind of show up. Oh gosh,
It's
Terry, is it
it's
Terry?
no, Kara.
No,
All right.
Sierra, I'm talking about the import
Oh,
failures. Sorry,
uh,
Terry, and feel free to unmute yourself. I'm probably mispronouncing your name, but it's import failures. When this pops up, I'm thinking of DWG. Oh my God, here we go again. My job, debug, fix, teach. That's great. Yeah, import failures. There's a couple in there. You can search for the word import and find those. There's that one also where it says the CAD file is like 50 billion miles from the or origin. That's always a good one. That actually is a massive performance one. Sierra,
And
Chiara.
maybe
Yeah.
just adding a little information, it's not only about the DWG, but it's also concerning what it brings also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you got those line patterns you don't want, those filled regions, those everything. I mean, it's horrible. So
It is horrible. Thank you. That's actually why we developed Style Manager for
I was just
sure.
going to say, yeah.
Yep. And Ciara is saying duplicate elements, unique component naming for Kobe data. Great segue for you later, Richard. And
Exactly.
overlapping geometry from David Fink. That's a big one for me. And that was also, I think the word overlap, like I was just showing earlier, that's a smart one, I think, to look at, because for me, that that goes to accuracy, and that's just so much more important now in our BIM models. We need to understand, there's cases where that overlap may be necessary depending on sort of what the condition is, but generally speaking, the overlapping geometry is going to cause performance problems and perhaps quantity takeoff problems, which could also be significant to you. So great feedback. Thank you, everybody, for contributing on that one.
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment. One of our consultants that you may be familiar with, Brian Mackey, who's in the United States, but he's actually done some of our presentation or helped us with some presentations in EMEA. So he had mentioned about, like, duplicate type marks, and you think, well, that's not that big of a deal, right? That happens quite a bit. But in this particular model he was talking about, there was, what was the quantity, Glennis? It was something in the thousands, basically,
It was
where
a
there were
high number, yeah.
yeah, where there were duplicate type marks, and that did impact the performance quite a bit, which I was a little bit surprised at. So some of the things that you may think that, oh, it's not that big of a deal, but the quantities, again, this is going back to the quantity of warnings, right, is a big factor. So if you've got something that's in the thousands, even though it might be a line is slightly off axis where you could sort of ignore it, but if you've got 10,000 of those, then that may be something you need to address. Okay, well, great. I really appreciate the interactive feedback there. So, piggybacking on that particular theme of, which warnings are important, well, how do we actually fix the warnings? So I've got some examples, and I'm really happy that we had some of these. Actually, I think we had all, maybe not the duplicate marks, but we had the first two that people talked about, which was identical instances. Glennis talked about like incorrect schedule counts. That's a big issue. The geometry, the floor overlapping, that's obviously, it's trying to calculate that to some degree, or it's trying to figure that out. And so those overlap warnings are, again, a performance issue. And then again, if there are duplicate marks or duplicate, let's say, values, right, that's also something that we want to be able to look at. So what I'm going to do is switch over here to Revit. And this is actually the sample data from the Autodesk, the Kobe model. So if you're familiar with the BIM interoperability tools that adds Kobe, basically project parameters or shared parameters to the project that are Kobe specific, that's the package for that is the BIM interoperability tools. And so we have several interfaces. Basically, our Ideate BIM link also works with the Kobe data, but you're going to see that I've got some information here that is Kobe related, because I thought that a lot of people in EMEA are using Kobe information. So let's come over here to Ideate Explorer, right? And this particular model, and let's just see what we have going on here. Looks like a pretty good model to me. We've got over 20,000 elements in this particular model. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our Ideate Explorer, Glennis kind of showed this, but we have this warnings tab that is going to show you the warnings that we have ranked, right, based on this information here. We've ranked that, looking at this particular file, right, there are warnings that are ranked high, medium, and low that, of course, we can configure and share across our Office standards. So in this particular case, there is one that highlighted floors overlap. So again, that was something that people had mentioned was an issue, right? So if I select on the actual warning, I can drill down to the elements that basically contain that warning, right? And so I can look at this and I can highlight it really, this 64 millimeter concrete, and the same way with this. And it's actually highlighting in the model, but it's sort of hard to see, especially when I've got this 3D view and all this information. So what I'm going to do is use the control key, and I'm going to select on both of those concrete floors. And then a fairly recent enhancement to Ideate Explorer, this was in May of 2021, we integrated in some of the Revit tools, for instance, being able to isolate the elements, to reset, to do a selection box. So I can isolate those two elements right here. And you can see very quickly the geometrical problem here, right? And so this is what I was talking about earlier, whereas this might be identified within the Revit dialog, the Revit warnings, but then you have to close it, you have to make the change. In our case, we can keep this open, right? I can go ahead over here and select to edit the boundary of this geometric overlap and bring this other floor slab back so it's not conflicting with the overall building floor slab. This is like sort of an entryway pad. And then go ahead and select OK. And that's going to then make that change. Then I can reset the temporary hide isolate. And I can then decide that I want to refresh the warnings list, right? And when I do that, that warning goes away. So there are no geometrical floor constraints, or I should say overlaps in this particular model anymore. So another one here is identical instances. That was something also that was brought up on the topic here, right? So if I go over here to this element, right, I can double click to zoom into the area where that is, which is it's a return air system. And I can see the different connections here, right? Now in this case, the ceiling itself, as you see on my 3D view, has been turned off, so it's easy for me to see. But what I like to do again now, just to show you another example, is I'm going to highlight both of these elements. I mean, they're obviously in the same location, but I'm going to do the selection box around them, right? And so I can now see that in maybe a different context and see where that return air diffuser. Now, really important here, they may look like the same thing, but watch this. When I click on it, I can see that this one element was actually created by TJ Meehan. And this element was created by some stupid guy named R.W. Taylor. And that happens to me, so I could say that I'm stupid. So there is also potentially other information about that, right? And so when I'm looking at the properties here, there may be situations where the first one has maybe the correct mark value and the second one has the wrong mark value or the wrong information. So it's not just so easy to say, oh, we'll just remove one, maybe the initial one, or remove the second one. You want to really review to see which one is the correct one. But in this particular case, I see that myself have duplicated these. So what I can do is actually come to the warning itself, right? And then I can right-click, and then based on the element IDs, I can retain the originals or retain the latest. So because I made the mistake and I copied those by mistake, I'm going to say retain the originals, right? And I'm going to delete automatically the air terminals that I duplicated. So I'm going to go ahead and select delete, and then again, that warning goes away. So we're going to come back over here and just turn on the entire model, so I'm not just seeing the section box there. So again, now I have no high ranked warnings, and there are two alert icons. The first alert icon is basically specifying this threshold. So if I go over this, and we've set a default of 100 warnings per 100 megabyte file, so it's basically one warning per 1 megabyte. And so if I go over that, in this case, I'm sort of allowed, and I use that very cautiously when I say allowed, but I've set the threshold to say, show me the alert icon if I go over 50 warnings, right? And so right now I'm under that, I'm 40. And also show me the alert icon if I have high ranked warnings. So that's why in this case, I don't see either of those alert icons. As an example, just to show you that if I want to overwrite something, like in this particular case, let's say elements have duplicate values, because I'm going to go ahead and fix that in a moment. I can set the ranking here to be high. And when I do that, that's going to make that a high ranked warning, and you'll see that alert icon. And then in fact, I can sort again so that it puts the high ranked warnings along the top. So what is this? Elements have duplicate type or duplicate values. So I'm going to come over here and I'm actually going to switch just to see this a little bit easier because I know I've got a plan view here and I could double click on this and zoom in and I see that I've got a number of doors, as you see here, that have this mark value of 100, right? I've come this whole hallway. So instead of reviewing this information in this context per se, I might also want to review it as a schedule. And so I have a Kobe component door schedule in the background here. And I can see I've actually sorted this schedule by the mark value itself, right? And so like you see, there's all the 100s and they actually, the Kobe component name is not filled out. So I'm going to use another tool here that we have within our toolkit called Ideate Apps to renumber this, and I can renumber it directly from the schedule. So I'm going to come over here to Ideate Software. We're going to select on renumber, and I have a number of rules, right, to renumber all different types of elements. In this particular case, we're going to renumber the doors, and we're going to renumber this directly from the schedule itself. So the door rule, if I just pick this standard one, right, it's going to take the room number and it's going to then basically say that if there are more than one door in that that's assigned to that room, or whether it's a from room or to room value, and it's going to have an A, B, or C. So pretty simple. I'm just going to say start numbering. And so it reads all the doors, right? And it gives me this preview. And at this point, I have the ability, if I want to actually switch the from room and to room information, I can do that. So in this case, if I, from the fitting room, dispensary to the corridor, I can actually change that in the database. But in this case, I'll say, oh, all that looks pretty good. And so when I go ahead and say accept the changes, notice that column C will have all the new information. And this actual schedule was sorted based on the mark value, right? And so what I would like to do is I'm going to say none here. And I'm actually going to come back here and say, well, I really want to sort by the component name ascending, because I know that there's some blanks there. You saw before, but we don't see them because they're down in my schedule because of the way it's sorted. So I'm going to select OK. And now you see the blanks, right? And so I want to be able to fill out the Kobe component name. Again, I'm going to come back to Ideate Renumber. And Renumber has the ability to, like I said, create these rules and not only push data into, like in this case, column C, the mark value, but also into other project or shared parameters. So I've got this door Kobe component. I want to show you this for a second. If I go over here and I edit it, what we're doing is we're taking the information from the door, or we actually have this door underbar prefix. I'm going to say that the door mark value, right? But it's, instead of pushing it into the mark, I'm actually pushing it into a target parameter called Kobe component name. So that's very flexible. I just wanted to show you that you have that ability. Also, Kobe should not allow, or one of the conditions is that you should not have spaces. So that's why I want to change this, from door space 1 AO3 to the underbar. So I've set this rule up. I say start numbering. That looks great. I'm going to accept the changes. And you'll see then that information is now filled out in column B, the Kobe component name, and it has no spaces. And it's using the door prefix with the underbar, the mark value. So now, all this time, our little Ideate Explorer has been patiently waiting right in the background. And so I can come over here and say, refresh that, and that warning goes away. And notice I had made it a high ranked warning that since I refreshed, there's no longer a high ranked warning. Again, the alert icon goes away. So it's a great way for me to be able to fix these warnings and using a number of different tools. So, I can interact with the model with Ideate Explorer open and showing me exactly the warnings and like I said, allowing me to fix them either by the tools within Revit or, as you saw here, maybe using some of the tools with Ideate Apps. And we've got a nice surprise for you with Ideate Apps at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to switch back over here to my PowerPoint, and we're going to go to the next part. So now, we have all this information, right, about Ideate or Revit warnings with our Ideate Explorer Revit warnings dialog. But Glynis is going to talk a little bit more about something that we've introduced called our warnings dashboard, allowing you to use Ideate automation. And there are a number of different sort of methods allowing you to do that. So I'd like to have Glynis sort of describe what is the dashboard and what is the, she already mentioned automation. She kicked that off earlier.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, just a couple items. We've had this long-standing request for customers to, mine very specific pieces of information out of your Revit files, whether they're on BIM 360 / Autodesk Construction Cloud or just, on your local server, for a variety of reasons. And one of the very consistent sort of trends in that is for the purposes of providing insight into the health of a Revit project. And BIMLink does a lot of that lifting for our customers. But one of the pieces that was sort of missing in that was, I want to know, how many, CAD imports are there in the Revit file, which BIMLink can definitely, illuminate that information for you. But also this kind of information, the warnings information. So we're now providing this additional information, and because it also can be integrated into our automation tool, which works outside of Revit, we can help provide automatically in the background information that relates to warnings that could be included in your dashboard. So the first question really is, what kind of data is the most useful data? And again, this information really came from a lot of review and beta tester feedback. And what we landed on was, as Richard's mentioned a couple times here, number of warnings is actually agreed upon as the most sort of important thing in the context of the file size. So actually warnings per file size seems to be the thing that everybody can agree on. That's a great, clear, consistent metric, assuming you can get the file size and assuming you can get the number of warnings. But a variant on that is important warnings, right? We've talked a little bit here about which ones are important. And so in Explorer, not only can you rank them, we saw the red, yellow, green, but you can also actually ignore some. And on a per project basis, that sometimes is useful. So in other words, if I have a project where everything is at a 2-degree angle for whatever reason, Revit is going to potentially spit back a bunch of off-axis warnings, and that might not be appropriate for that particular project. So what we're showing here on the screen is one example of the files which actually I just created in the background. So I'm going to show that in a second, but let's look at a couple other ideas about visualizing warnings-based information. So Richard, if you could switch the slide here.
Absolutely.
This screenshot actually comes from a Power BI template that we provide to our Ideate Explorer subscribers on request. So you can email support@ideatesoftware.com, and if you're an Explorer subscriber, we'll share this with you. This is one that actually I think was requested by somebody at Pollard Thomas here on the call. I don't know if they're on the call, but we'd been working with them to kind of provide some detailed data, and the idea of actually showing me across multiple projects which warnings were the most prevalent. And that is, I think somebody else in the call here sort of mentioned that not only is it important to fix the warnings, but also to use them as a way to maybe provide training. Right, you may be seeing a recurring theme in the warnings that you need to realize here. Hey, no loss defined is really causing a lot of problems. It's causing a lot of warnings. How are we going to fix that? Or what do we have to teach the staff? Or is it something that we should be not paying attention to based on our disciplines? Then the next one, Richard, which is another this is just showing in this example when you pick, a specific warning in this Power BI. So if I pick the one in red there, the results below will show you which files that warning is occurring within. Go ahead and scroll the next one. The primary sort of KPI, if you will, is this one. We're showing both warnings per megabyte and then warnings count. So it's the same kind of information, but displayed in two different ways. The top one, I think, is the most relevant one. Again, the warnings per megabyte. And there's a red line, which unfortunately is really close to the left-hand side there. That's the threshold. So we're saying, hey, if we all agree that 1 warning per megabyte is a good number, yeah, that number that Richard's pointing to, you can really see sort of how far out of whack some of these are, which is a little bit different than just knowing how many warnings there are. But both of those, could provide useful information to you. And then the last one here, which a lot of people were asking for as well, and really is only possible with this newest version of Explorer, which includes some critical pieces of information. So being able to do this kind of warnings over time, the only way you can do that is if in your data export, you're capturing the date. So adding the date is something that is possible through automation. That's not something you're going to get just with sort of the native Explorer export that I showed you earlier. But if you're using automation, you're also going to get the file size. You're also going to get the date. And then you can sort of create this kind of dashboard. So those are just some of the ways in which you can leverage that kind of data to represent visually to yourself and to your team kind of what's going on in your projects. And I just wanted to wrap this portion up by, I need to make myself presenter. Let me go back over here. I'm gonna close this, sorry. Make myself presenter. And at the very beginning of this presentation, we ran this task in automation. Automation is a separate tool. It runs outside of Revit, and it's part of our enterprise bundle. If you're on enterprise with us, you have access to this already. It can be purchased separately, but it does run in the background. So I picked those 4 different files from 4 different versions. They were all on BIM 360. And what it did while we were talking is it created these corresponding files over here. The time it took to open those 4 files, and each of these files, I know these don't represent fully the size of projects that you're probably all working on, but this is a range of project size, 100 to 200 megabyte file sizes, and it took 10 minutes. It's going to be a lot quicker, obviously, to have this sort of run in the background. And as I mentioned earlier, that script, part of what that script does is it actually takes a predefined Excel template. So there is one that ships with the new version of Explorer that you can take a look at, and anybody can take a look at that template. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up one of these so we can take a look at that. So this one's not a work shared file. That's why that message happened. But you can see sort of this is the template. So what we did is we copied that template from kind of a source, and then to that template, we have a bunch of sort of predefined pivot tables or whatnot that kind of show us. Let me actually open the other one because it's better to look at a work sharing one. Let's see. This one, I'm pretty sure is work sharing. There we go. And so in the template file, what we're doing, you can see these orange tabs at the bottom. Those are just sort of the setup, the pivot tables, or whatever you are wanting to do. The blue results here are coming from BIMlink. And so we're dumping out a whole bunch of data that we've specified about, the levels or the content in that file that also is part of our health check. And then the back end is what the Explorer automation part is able to do. So this tab, for example, this is what everybody who has Explorer, you can export this manually if you just own Explorer. And you can see you're getting, the timestamp here, you're getting this new warning category here, you're getting the elements listed in this sort of fashion, depending upon the warning type. And then lastly, this tab, this is what automation itself is able to also export from the Explorer context. And this information, I know this seems really sort of simple, but we had a lot of questions and feedback on this particular data field, which is file size. So I will say that this is what we call not the BIM 360 file size. The BIM 360 file size, if you looked on the BIM 360 context, actually frequently reports the embedded results of any linked files. So it kind of munges them all together. And so it comes off as being sort of highly inaccurate, depending upon sort of how you're looking at it or how your project's set up. This is the downloaded version of the file size. So this is going to more accurately reflect what you would be experiencing, locally on your desktop or on your virtual machine as you're sort of processing it. So file size is really important. We've spent a lot of time making sure we have the right file size. Also, we were requested to export things like the Revit version. But you can see here we're also breaking out these the rankings of those, including any that are non-ranked. There's none that are hidden, but if they were, then the difference between the Ideate Explorer warnings could potentially be lower than this. This is going to be all the warnings defining the project. But again, if you had some, let's say you decided that those line sketches were off axis, should be ignored in this project, you could have had 400 of them here, in which case this would be 135 here. So that information is being written out in the background for you. And then if you're using the Power BI, I'll just pull that up here. And their instructions, again, this is anybody who owns Explorer can request this, and you can use this with or without automation. Obviously, with automation, it's going to be all automated, but you can also manually export those results if you want to. So this is kind of what it looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and just go to refresh here. So the way this works is that any Excel file that's kind of dumped into the specified source location will be read, and if it's formatted in the expected way, then it's going to automatically be added to the results here. So you can see here, here's my today's date, and I can look at the data that came from just today that was exported, and I can sort of read that information here. And I don't really have a whole lot of data over time yet. I need to churn that. And I have set these tasks up so that they run every day automatically through the Windows Task Scheduler, which is also documented on our website. And when we send you information, we kind of include information about that as well. So hopefully that gives you kind of a flavor of what you can potentially do with a dashboard as it relates to warnings-based information. Thanks, Richard.
All right, let me go ahead and make myself presenter again. Make sure that, and also I just wanted to reiterate, if you did want that template, that all the great stuff that Glynis was showing, you can just send an email to support@ideatesoftware.com and request the Excel/Power BI template for warnings. And then since Glynis was mentioning it, I never showed this, that you can, the line slightly off axis, you can right click and you can hide that warning. So when I do that, then that would be part of the calculations that Glynis showed, where that warning is hidden. So actually the warnings I have are 37, where the Revit warnings are going to show higher. At any point, you can say, well, you know what, just show me the ones that are, there actually are no high ranked warnings, but just show me the medium ones, right? This filter is sort of built in, and then show me the hidden warnings. So if I want to unhide, I would show the hidden warnings, then I would right click and unhide. So you can choose to hide and unhide those warnings very easily. So I'll just go back and set that to none. So just in case you were wondering about, well, how do you hide a warning to modify that spreadsheet that Glynis was showing? Okay, now for the fun stuff. So we have a great offer for everyone that has attended this presentation today, where we're going to give you a 1-year subscription to Ideate Apps. So what you will, all this information is actually going to be included in an email. So because you attended this presentation, you will receive an email with all the detailed instructions, right? So then now this is for only those customers that do not have Ideate apps. So if you already have Ideate apps, obviously you have access to it. So, but if let's say you're only subscribing to BIMLink, or maybe even you're a non-customer of Ideate Software where you have nothing or none of our solutions, then you are able to have access to Ideate apps. So you can download a trial directly from our website. So you'll click on the, download a trial for Ideate apps. You'll install that, and then in the trial dialog, you'll mention Ideate Software, which is the EMEA user group, and then you'll start the trial. And then we're going to be giving you the code, which will then activate your subscription for that full year. And now it's a standalone subscription, meaning that it's tied to a particular computer. So it's not a floating license, but it's a great way for you to review those productivity and efficiency tools and use them on a daily basis. So what I showed with Ideate Renumber, that's just one of the 9 tools that are available within Ideate apps. So we hope that you'll really enjoy this, and we're really excited about getting more people to use and see the benefits of Ideate apps. So our action items, we've got about 4 minutes. Of course, I want to see if there's any questions, but please type any questions into the question panel, and we'll try to answer those as best we can in our few remaining minutes. We want to keep this interactive. But while you're thinking about your questions for both myself and Glynis, the action item is to couple of different things. Is if you want to try that Ideate apps, you can go ahead and start your trial by downloading the Ideate apps software. But we also want to make sure that you download the latest Ideate Explorer. The updates that Glynis showed at the beginning of this presentation were delivered in September. I think we actually made them live like September 1st or September 2nd. So if you haven't updated Ideate Explorer in a little bit, I would highly recommend that you go and get the latest Ideate Explorer so you have those additional data fields when you're exporting out to Excel for the warnings data. So again, I want to see if there are any questions. Again, don't be shy. We really appreciate the fact that you were interactive with telling us some of your warning issues. Glynis, I don't see they're a quiet bunch today.
It doesn't look like it. Welcome any questions about Power BI, dashboard, warnings. And you can also email us later too if it occurs to you later.
Oh, here's a great one from Terry. Can you run the health check on multiple projects on the BIM 360? What's the last one? I can't read the word. The BIM 360 hubs. Yeah, the answer is yes on multiple projects. I don't know about multiple hubs, Glynis, at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think she, well, sorry, there's two variations on that question. Hey, Terry. You can run it, yes, you can run it on any project you have access to. And you can choose the example that I was showing today. I was focusing on live models. A lot of our customers were it was important to them specifically for health check type stuff to not necessarily be going to the published models, but you can do either one. And as long as you have access to those files, then yeah, you could do that.
And then there's, just one hub, but multiple projects. Okay, Terry, thanks. Yep, so that's even easier.
Yep.
Did you want to potentially talk about Simone's question? She brought about with Ideate automation being able to print. I'll just say it's something that we're looking at. That's a really good, let's say, not necessarily question or suggestion. Maybe that's the right word I'm looking for. We currently don't have Ideate automation for printing, but it is something that a number of our customers have asked us for. So that's something that we are sort of reviewing.
Yeah, indeed. And actually it's great timing to be bringing those things to the table. We're actively making some very substantial improvements to Ideate for the spring release. And so any input on that is, oops, that's my timer to stop talking, is always appreciated. We are already taking on things like being able to share the scripts with people who don't have the data cached, for example, and a lot of other really nice features that should make it even easier to use.
Well, excellent. Well, I show exactly 2 p.m. in London, 3 p.m. Central Europe. So I want to thank everyone for their time and attention today. Please, if you'd like the data set that Glynis showed with the Power BI, send an email to support@ideatesoftware.com and look for the email for the all the details specific for the Ideate Apps offer for getting that 1-year subscription to Ideate Apps. Anything else, Glynis?
No, just thanks again for your feedback, and also just the Excel files that I ended up producing and showing you all. Those are part of the Explorer installation. So if you go to Program Data's Ideate Explorer, you'll see that health check Excel file just that's formatted. It's a simple file that has a number of pivot tables set up, and so it might be interesting also to kind of take a look at that.
Exactly, and it's also delivered with Ideate BIM link as well, or so under the health check sample link folder,
Yeah,
there
this
is
is
a
a
health
new version of that.
version, right? But there is
Yeah.
also a different version under the BIM link health check folder.
Yep. Great. Thanks,
Well, great,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you so much. And if you're an Ideate Software customer, we want to thank you so much for being a customer. We really value your opinions and value your usage.